Welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast, a show where we help sports coaches, personal trainers, strength and conditioning coaches, and PE teachers learn how they can impact their athletes' movement and physical development in a fun, practical way. I'm your host, Isaac, founder of Athletic Skills, and in today's episode, we chat to Tim Egerton, who is a running coach and owner of Foxwood Personal Training. Tim shares what is involved as a running coach, his philosophies on how to develop runners, how S&C can complement endurance training, and what he looks for in analysing runners and their movement, and what drills he may use to develop technique, but also in an engaging and practical way. Don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review if you enjoy the show. Now let's get started. This podcast is brought to you by Brendan Chaplin Business Coaching. Brendan guides coaches and service-based entrepreneurs to deliver their best work, build a seven-figure lifestyle and performance business, and create a life of freedom. I started working with Brendan in September 2023, and it's been a great journey since I started working with him in launching my own business, Athletic Skills. Brendan has been fully invested in me and is a great person to chat with, to share ideas, and has vast knowledge and experiences to share also. The reason I picked to work with Brendan is that he has done it himself in launching businesses and has a similar background to myself in S&C and wants to live a life that you want. If you want to speak to Brendan on how he can help create a life of freedom and guide you on that journey, get in touch with him by one of the methods in the show notes and DM him the word coach, and he will start the conversation. You won't regret it, and there's a good chance it might just change your life too. Hi everyone, welcome to the Athletic Skills Podcast. I'm delighted to have Tim Egerton on with me. So Tim, thank you very much for joining. So feel free to give a bit of background on yourself and what you're up to at the moment with Foxwood Personal Training as well.
Yeah, cool. So thanks for having me on as well. So I work heavily with runners, and first and foremost, how it all started, I guess, I was a runner myself. Pretty good runner, not a great runner, not making international major championship teams, but quite successful nonetheless. And ultimately, I guess that was my identity for a large part of my life. And as a fairly talented youth runner, I received an invite to undergo some physiology monitoring and testing at a university sports science lab. And I accepted that and I went along, and I really enjoyed that experience of being in the lab and found the whole process very interesting. And so for me, that sparked a real interest in sports sciences. And so I wanted to, as a result of that experience, go on and study sport science at university, which I did at Cardiff Metropolitan University. And during my time at Cardiff Metropolitan as an undergrad, I began to realize that my main interest, I was really interested in the strength and conditioning side of things. So upon graduating, I went straight into a master's program in strength and conditioning at Bolton University. I think at the time, I think there were only maybe 2 master's degrees in strength and conditioning in the UK at the moment. At that point, I think Bolton and I think the other one was Edinburgh. Obviously, there's quite a few now. But anyway, besides the point. The point is really that I was starting to develop a bit of expertise in strength and conditioning. And I began to work at a university as a strength and conditioning coach. I began lecturing at another university in strength and conditioning. But it wasn't actually that long before I started to realize actually I wanted to work for myself. I wanted to be self-employed and have a business. I probably wasn't convinced at that point that I could make a success of being a self-employed strength and conditioning coach, working predominantly with athletes. So I set myself up more as a general personal trainer, and so Foxwood Personal Training was born, and that's still the name I train under to this day. But I also began to realize that actually from a business perspective, that there are benefits to having a real area of specialism. And so with my academic background in the sports sciences and strength and conditioning, coupled with my performance sport background as a middle distance runner, it lent itself nicely to focusing on that niche, strength training for runners. And unfortunately for me, it turns out there is quite a big demand for information on that topic area. So that takes us up to where we are today. It's my big focus, I suppose, from a business perspective, but also from a personal development perspective, because I've just been accepted onto the doctoral program in strength and conditioning at St. Mary's, where I'm going to be focusing my research on specific areas of strength training for runners. So that's kind of me from the very beginning days right through to now.
That's great. I'll just go down a tangent that I didn't expect to go down around the business stuff. So I work with some sports coaches and PTs on their business and developing, working for themselves, because I've done it myself over the last year and seen the power of working for yourself as well, in terms of flexibility and working with the people you want to. So I'm interested in, you've gone from working from with quite a general population or thinking that would be successful, but then you found working in one specific area and being a specialized coach in one area is the way to go. So what made you go down that route in terms of, you said you realized that's probably the way to go?
Yeah, in the early days, I was combining employed work with my self-employed work and trying to gain traction. And I guess it was a bit of a slow burner. And so I was just thinking outside the box a little bit, thinking, is there other ways to go about it, and seeing what other people had to say. And a lot of common advice around marketing is to niche down. And so just that led to that thought process. And so I just started putting more material out there on social media, specifically tailored to runners rather than general population stuff. So I still have some of my early clients that are more general population, and I still to this day do attract some more general population type clients, but increasingly over time, it's very much a focus on the running side of things, and specifically the S&C side of things for runners. So it wasn't probably a specific moment where I'm switching focus. It was more of a general transition.
And you got that flexibility you can work with who you want to work with, who you enjoy working and training with as well. Like you said, you find your passion in running coaching. That's a good way to go down. I just want to touch on the mindset of a running coach and what actually a running coach does. Maybe a strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer. You might think just running is running. So what does a running coach look like, or what do they do?
Yeah. So I guess the mindset of how a coach thinks and what they do. I guess in terms of how they think, I'm going to generalize a little bit here. Of course, there's exceptions, but I think the generalization holds true a little bit. And I think in a fairly two-dimensional way, a lot of them. So it's like you've got your high mileage coaches, and then you've got maybe like your quality coaches, if you like. And by quality, I basically mean someone who focuses on the speed rather than the volume side of things. And there's a little bit of pigeonholing yourself into one camp or the other. You're either one of them or you're one of us. And the mileage coaches probably tend to criticize the methodology of the quality coaches, and vice versa. The mileage coach might say that the quality-based coaches simply don't do enough volume to build fitness, a sufficient fitness in their athletes. And then on the other counter argument from there's more speed-based coaches might be that high level of mileage is going to injure all the athletes, or it's going to kill their speed doing so much mileage. You hear that one a lot. Obviously, there's loads of the coaches out there that don't pigeonhole themselves like that, but it does happen. And I think the issue is things are a little bit more nuanced than that. So you can look at what the best runners in the world are doing, top world class in middle and long distance runners. And that is actually evidence enough to show that, yes, doing a lot of running is important. If you want to reach the top levels, you are going to have to do a lot of mileage. It is important. But then on the flip side of that, certainly not everyone can and should be training like a world-class runner. Not everyone will be able to tolerate that level of mileage. And even those that might be able to, it's going to take them a long period of time building up to that. And even once they're there, there's still other factors to consider. If we think about principles of training, one of those key principles is specificity. So yes, you're going to be doing a lot of mileage, but you're also going to have to do something that's a bit more specific as well. You're going to have a significant portion of your training that's faster around race pace, that kind of stuff. But even beyond that, if we just think about building a base or a foundation, a lot of running coaches associate that term with an endurance base. So just building that aerobic endurance, building the mileage. But we can build multiple different types of base, actually. We can build an endurance base. We can also build a base of speed through appropriate sprint training. And we can also build a base of strength and power through appropriate S&C work in the gym. So getting on to what a running coach does, program design, periodization, planning, all of that is a key part of what they do, trying to put these different pieces together into a cohesive program. But there's still more to it than that, because obviously you can do all of that from a fairly scientific perspective, and it can be quite dull, to be fair. You might be looking at your programming and you might be designing certain sessions, and you might, I don't know, eight 400s off 90 seconds at 1500 meter pace, something like that. It's got a certain amount of volume at a certain work to rest ratio at a certain intensity. Great. It's ticking all these boxes so that we're creating this stimulus that's going to lead to this adaptation. great on paper, but we also need to think about making it engaging for the athletes as well. So trying to, yes, achieve the right stimulus for the right adaptation, but packaging it in different ways so that the athlete is engaged with what you're doing. And also, I think to take a high profile example, a current someone like Keely Hodgkinson, her coach, Trevor Painter, places a lot of emphasis on the group having fun. And he likes to say a happy athlete is a fast athlete. There's a lot to that as well. Just having, if you're working in person, making sure you're having a bit of banter with the athletes as well and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know if I've gone off a bit of a tangent there, but that's a little bit on what the coach does and how he thinks and stuff like that.
No, that's great. And it touches on one of my philosophies around what I'm trying to show coaches is how to make things engaging and fun. It's not just to build fitness is running shuttles or lifting weights. There's a lot more with engaging and fun activities you can do. But I just want to chat around how you go around engaging your athletes or making sessions fun, because it's a little bit different to people that have playing ball sports or
Yeah.
team sports that you've got a lot of group athlete groups that you can work with and have team games or invasion games. So how do you go around creating fun and engagement with your runners?
It's going to depend on the population a lot, I think, and the nature of how you work. If you're obviously, I think there's a big emphasis on your podcast with sort of youth athletes. And so it might look different in that population to say with a lot of the athletes I work with, which is also more on a one-to-one basis. So I wear two hats. The bread and butter of what I do is the one-to-one in-person stuff. So working with runners in my gym in York on their S&C with a view to helping the running. But then since becoming a bit more specialized within running specifically within the business, I also offer online coaching for runners, which is a bit more all encompassing, working on their running programming as well as their S&C programming. And so for me, I guess it alludes to what I was saying with especially on the online coaching side of things, that a big part of that is the program design, the planning. That is a big factor. That's when it comes down to it, that's mainly what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. But you just need to make sure you're packaging the sessions in an engaging way. So try and mix those sessions up so that they're achieving a certain stimulus, but they look quite different. You might just break, rather than straight repetitions all the way through, you might do blocks of, for example, the 8 400s. Instead of doing 8 400s, you might do 3 sets of 3 400s of shorter recoveries within the set and then a longer break between sets. It's just a different way of packaging it, but overall it's the same kind of stimulus and just trying to find different ways of presenting the same kind of session. But then if you're working with a youth athlete, I think, and a group of youth athletes, there's other ways of doing it as well. You can add a bit more play into it. So fartlek is sort of a term that means speed play. So you could go out in the park rather than train on the track. You could get a bunch of runners out in the park and they could take it in turns to lead a rep. And it's up to them how fast they go and how far they go. And then they'll have a period of recovery and then someone else takes a rep. For example, it's a little bit less structured. It's a little bit more chaotic in a way, but it tends to create a lot of enjoyment in sessions. So it depends on the environment. It's not something I particularly schedule, but if I were to be working with a group of youth athletes, I'd probably look to incorporate that kind of stuff as well. And maybe just games at the end of sessions as well. You do your more specific training, and then rather than go for a slow warm down jog, play some kind of a ball game or whatever, some kind of a game at the end of the session, which just gets them having a bit of a laugh as well.
Yeah, and then like you said, I like that phrase in terms of a happy athlete's a fast athlete as well. That's quite a good term to use. With your runners, so how does strength and conditioning support your coaching and the actual runners themselves? So how does this complement the endurance training that you might be doing at the moment?
Yeah, so like I said previously, that I do wear a couple of different hats. I've got my in-person clients one-to-one on the S&C side of things, and then I've got the online coaching, which is a bit more all-encompassing. But to be honest, matter too much. The principles are still the same. And I think the big one is that the S&C work is there to support the running training and not the other way around. So the running training is not there to support the S&C. It's that the S&C is there to support the running. And I think Dan John said it originally, you have to keep the main thing. So the running is the main thing. The S&C is there to support it. In practical terms, what that means is Yes, your strength sessions can't be so big and so long and so demanding that they leave the runner sore for days, and that interferes with what running they have to do in the upcoming days. So that's something we have to consider. We also probably aren't going to be programming a big strength session the day before a big running session, because it's unlikely the runner will be sufficiently recovered in time. It's more likely to be the other way around. That big S&C session might come the day after a key running session, or even in some examples, for example, if I'm working with a student athlete or maybe an athlete that's only working part-time to allow themselves to pursue their running to a higher level. In situations like that, I might even do things like stacking hard days. So they perform a key running session on a morning, I don't know, 9, 10 a.m., something like that. And then many hours later on the same day, they'll perform a key strength and conditioning session, I don't know, 4 p.m., 5 p.m., something like that. So there's a big time gap between them, but it is on the same day. The running session's first, so you are fresh for that. You're a little bit tired going to the S&C session, but because that's there to support the running, not the other way around, we're not so concerned about that. And the advantage of that is because you've not split them into separate days, yes, there's a bigger stress on that day. And so there's a bigger stress to recover from, but you then have a greater period of time to recover from that stress before the next key running session comes in the program. So so the size of the sessions, making sure they're not so demanding that you get too sore, and the placement of the sessions, big factors to consider in terms of making sure it's supporting the running in the correct way. And just another point on placement as well, we hear terms like microdosing as well, which can be useful. So for example, I said you might not perform a big running session, a big S&C session the day before a key running session, but maybe you would just throw in a small volume of plyometric work at a reasonably high intensity, and that nothing that's going to particularly fatigue the athlete, but it might create a bit of a potentiation so that performance actually increases in the running workout the following days. Just factors like that to consider, really.
And you mentioned at the start around creating bases, so not just an endurance based, but a speed based, but also strength and power. So how does strength and power complement a runner's performance?
Yeah, there's in numerous ways, really. So I can probably pinpoint maybe 3 key ways in which it will benefit the running performance. 1, less direct, and maybe 2, a little bit more direct. So the less direct way in which it will improve performance is through increasing robustness, making the runner less prone to injuries. So we can develop things like tissue tolerance. So if we expose those tissues to higher forces or higher levels of tension than they might be exposed to when you're running, then that sort of buffer, if you like, creates an element of robustness that will hopefully lead to increased resistance against injuries. Obviously, the running program still needs to be on point. If that's not on point, the runner will still probably get injured. But if that's where it needs to be and that's being managed appropriately, then the S&C work certainly can make us less injury prone and a little bit more robust. That's a big benefit. The other 2 benefits, as I see it, are a little bit more direct. It can help with speed development, because I think a classic paper by Wayand a number of years ago showed that essentially faster top sprint speeds are associated. One of the key factors that associate with faster top sprint speeds is the amount of ground reaction forces that are produced during the running stride. So if we can go in the weight room, perform our S&C work, and perform certain types of training that develop specific types of strength, specifically reactive strength, where we're training force production within timeframes that are specific to the period of time the foot's in contact with the ground when you're running. If we can develop that type of strength, that will help us to produce more force into the ground when we run, which should make us a faster sprinter. And of course, sprinters want to be faster sprinters, but actually so do middle distance runners, so do long distance runners, because it gives us greater speed reserve. So a greater differential between our top speed and the speed that we're likely to run at when we're racing, which will hopefully make us more efficient during our race. And also from a sprint finish perspective, which is obviously very important, more championship style racing, where the race is a little more tactical and it often comes down to sprint finish. If you've got that high level of pure speed, that's going to come into play there. So there's for sure a direct benefit from performing S&C work in terms of improving your sprint speed. But I believe there's also a direct benefit in terms of developing endurance as well, because we fatigue in a race, in an endurance race, in a number of different ways. One of those ways in which it manifests itself is, or one of the mechanisms by which we fatigue, I should say, is a decreased motor unit recruitment. So once we begin to tire, one of the reasons why is because our motor unit recruitment begins to decrease. So if we can go into the weight room and perform specific types of strength training that are geared towards high levels of motor unit recruitment, recruiting those high threshold motor units, then when it comes to fatigue in a race, we'll be able to start tapping into higher threshold motor units, the point of fatigue that we otherwise might not have been able to. And so that will delay that decrease in motor unit recruitment and hopefully will be a small factor resulting in a delay in fatigue. There's other elements as well, things like muscle damage. This particularly applies to some of the longer races, half marathons on the road, where, due to the repeated eccentric contractions, due to the repeated impacts, you actually accrue quite a lot of muscle damage during the race, which contributes to fatigue. And you can make yourself more resistant to that through appropriate strength training in the gym. Particularly maybe augmented eccentric work can make you a little bit more resistant to the muscle damage that occurs as a result of those repeated eccentric contractions during the running stride in a long distance race. And so can, help you make you more fatigue resistant and therefore improve your endurance in a race. So a fairly long-winded answer to essentially say that I think there's 3 different ways in which the S&C work helps you. It makes you a bit more bulletproof, a bit more injury resistant. It improves your top end speed, but there are certain ways in which it can directly improve your endurance as well.
And with these benefits, what's the buy-in like with the athletes that you work with in terms of strength and power training? Has that changed over time that you've been working with different sort of athletes over the years, or has it been a general theme throughout that people seeing the benefits of strength training with their running?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So for me personally, because of the way I've positioned myself as a kind of a go-to person on strength training for runners, people are unlikely to approach me for help unless they're already bought into the whole S&C thing for runners in the first place. If they don't really believe that's going to help them, they're probably not going to approach me for help. They're probably going to go to someone else. So I personally don't really have those kind of conversations on a day-to-day basis. It's not something I have to think about that much, but I do appreciate that there are a lot of runners out there that don't buy into the benefits of S&C and don't believe it will help them. And of course, there are S&C coaches out there in employed positions, whether it be at a university or a college or a school, or maybe just working in a club environment. And they're going to have athletes that are handed to them. And those athletes are expected to work with the S&C coach on strength and conditioning with them, presumably with a view to helping their running, but they might not really believe in it. They might not really buy into it. So I think it's a really important consideration for those environments. And then the question is, how do you go about that? And I think probably maybe one of the first things you can do is start to address the fears or the common fears that runners have around S&C for running. So things you hear a lot are, oh, won't it make me bulky? Won't it make me heavier? Putting on muscle and that extra weight will slow me down. So you can address that. Or something I've heard a number of times is, won't strength training make me tight? Won't it tighten me up? Or something I've already alluded to actually slightly just before was the whole the sessions being so big that they create a lot of soreness for days. They might be worried about that. They might be like, well, I've been sore from the strength training work and that's going to impact my running sessions. So I suspect those are probably 3 of the biggest sort of worries or fears that come up. And so if you can address those early on, that would hopefully help with buy-in. But obviously you want to also put across the benefits, which we were just talking about, robustness, speed development, and also how it can improve endurance. But the thing is, you probably just you don't want to just go on day one with your new athletes, present them with a lecture on all these benefits. It probably requires a bit of a softer approach than that. I think in the first place, just creating, again, a fun environment with the athletes, especially those that aren't necessarily bought into it. Don't scare them off with heavy weights from day one. Not that you would want to anyway. You'd want to build technique first and ease them into it, but make sure it's a not too a daunting environment for someone who's not necessarily accustomed to that environment. That would be important. Try and have fun with them. Try and get to know the athletes as people and what makes them tick, and make sure they know that you're invested in them and you care about them as people. And then once they know that you care about them and they've got that rapport, they're then probably going to be a bit more receptive to you saying, look, there are these benefits. It will make you more robust for these reasons. It will improve your sprint speed for these reasons. And improved sprint speed is important because of speed reserve and because of sprint finish and stuff like that. And then obviously the endurance side of things, that's the point at which you can just have those conversations. But I don't think it would probably work as well if you tried to just press that information on them from day one.
Yeah, and like I say, it's really in general with any athlete, really, it's about building trust with them, because they'll ultimately think that they're right, especially the higher level athletes. It's finding that trust, and that you've got their best interests at heart as well, and also finding out their problems and then showing the solutions that strength and conditioning or whatever you want to implement can help solve their problems, and that's where you can get their buy-in as well, in what I found in my coaching. So let's touch on running technique and drills. So where does running drills fit in within your coaching and training? And do you do that in the warm-ups, or do you do it as a separate session? So where does working on technique fit in?
Yeah. So drills, technique drills, it can fit in a few places really. But if we think about the purpose of running drills first, threefold. Again, another thing that's threefold. There's obviously a technical element to it. We're trying to cue certain technical aspects, which will hopefully then translate across into improved running form in the complete action over time. That is certainly an element of it. But I think there's also a mobility element to it as well. So when we were talking about what a running coach does, and I mentioned different types of basic and build, another aspect is mobility, which I didn't really touch on. But I guess if you are accruing a high level of mileage, it's quite a repetitive, one-dimensional kind of thing. And when you're running at a slower pace for longer distances, you're not really working through a very big range of motion. So if you're doing a lot of that over time and you're not doing a lot of other work, it can lead to the athlete getting less mobile and tighter over time, which we don't need to be super flexible as runners, but we want to avoid getting tighter and tighter over time. So some mobility work in there can be useful, but also running drills can serve as a little bit of a mobility tool, because essentially a running drill is an exaggerated form of running. You can do different drills, which exaggerates different aspects, but you are working through a greater range of motion, and it can help to maintain that range of motion. So that's one of the benefits in my eyes. And then the third benefit on top of mobility and technique is some of the drills can be plyometric in nature. So we can get a bit of a plyometric stimulus, and we can actually start putting a lot of force into the ground with some of the drills. And so we can get a bit of a strength and conditioning stimulus from some of these drills. So some S&C coaches, you will see them putting some running drills within the main S&C session. I tend to not do that on the whole. I tend to be a little bit more traditional, maybe put them in the warm-up. And this goes back to something I mentioned a little bit earlier as well, sort of potentiation. So I mentioned maybe you can do some plyometric exercises, for example, the day before a session, like a key running session, because it might have a bit of potentiation whereby it helps, as long as you don't go overboard on the volume, it's quite low volume, actually stimulates and improves performance the next day. Same kind of thing with the running drills, maybe on an even lower level. If it's incorporated into the warm-up just before you start your main reps, and you're selective with which drills you use, that the impact of them, the plyometric stimulus that's there, can be a useful part of the warm-up to potentiate performance going into the sessions. So yeah, I tend to put them in the warm-up. Not too much volume, not too many different drills. To be honest, I'm very selective with what I use on the whole. I'd rather have one or two drills be performed really well and with a lot of intention than performing a whole host of different drills with perhaps less focus, where you're chatting to me, you're not really paying attention. I'd rather just pick one or two, really focus on them and perform them with intent. And one particular drill I like is called the A skip. So I'll just try and describe it as best as I can. Essentially a high knee drill, but with an added skip into each high knee, if you like. So there's an extra foot contact, and that extra foot contact just helps keep every foot contact a lot shorter. And short ground contact times, or short periods in which you're working, is what makes plyometric in nature. And so that A skip is really useful for keeping ground contact time short, keeping it more plyometric in nature, and putting a lot of force into the ground. So that's one I like to use quite a lot of the time. Going back to what I would do differently if I was working with, say, a youth athlete, if I was working with a youth athlete or a group of youth athletes, I would probably use a much wider selection of drills and probably not even be too worried about them being super specific to running. I might do more lateral ones, cariokas, whatever, mix it up quite a lot, because with the youth athlete, I'm probably less concerned about a strong plyometric stimulus and more concerned about just the skill development aspect. And we know, I guess, from a motor learning perspective and skill development, if we've got a lot more variety in the session, that helps with skill retention. So in terms of how much that skill might improve in a single session, if we're just focusing on one thing during that session, then within that session, we'll probably get a bigger increase in skill development. But in terms of how well that skill is retained the next day or the next week or the next month, if there was more variety in there, then that tends to result in better skill retention. So yeah, with the youth athlete, I'd be looking at a whole range of different drills and trying to mix it up as much as I can. But then with the more established senior athletes, I'm a lot more selective.
And I was going to touch on running drills because I see it's coming to team sports a lot more recently over the years. And a lot of sports coaches that I've been working with or been seeing have been putting running drills into their warm-ups and into their sessions, but maybe not having a purpose of or understanding why they're actually doing it, because they might have seen another coach do it, they might have seen it online. So let's just touch on the A skip there briefly. So firstly, why are you implementing an A skip, and what sort of outcomes are you looking for within the A skip as well?
Yeah. So essentially one of the main reasons why I like it is because it's actually quite a simple drill. So it's not too technical to introduce and implement. And considering that some of my athletes are online clients and I'm not there in person coaching them, so in not a lot of circumstances, simple is better. So it's easier for them to grasp and nail the basics down well. In terms of what I'm looking for, I'm probably, if I'm there in person or if they show me a video of what they're doing, I'm looking to hear that ground contact. I'm looking to hear that they're putting force into the ground and it feels and sounds like pop, like nice and sharp. I don't want a soft ground contact. I want to hear that they're really driving into the ground and it's the ground contact in terms of short. That's the key thing from a plyometric standpoint. And then there's certain technical things I might be looking for as well. So things like dorsiflexion of the ankle during when the knee is raised, that's a key thing I look for, because essentially when we dorsiflex the ankle or pull the toes up towards the shin, we place the calf under a little bit of a stretch. And the calf crosses both the ankle joint and the knee joint, which a lot of people don't appreciate, but it does. And what that means, if the calf is under a little bit of a stretch, then when you toe off during the running stride, it will get pulled through a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently. So you're improving the efficiency of the recovery leg by having the foot in that dorsiflex position. It also puts the foot in a slightly better position for the next foot strike as well. Looking at arm action, upright posture, stuff like that as well. But certain key elements of running technique, I'm looking to cue well. And then on top of that, I'm looking for a really forceful foot contact. And I like to listen for it as well, really hear that contact.
And you use A skip probably in teaching upright running rather than acceleration, or so you'd be
Yeah,
looking at
for
A skips
sure.
more. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more of an upright running drill. Yeah, looking at upright running mechanics, top speed running mechanics. You obviously acceleration important as well. Arguably less so for the endurance athlete who don't have an acceleration phase, but certainly if you are looking at training sprinters, then you'd need to look at acceleration mechanics as well as maximum speed mechanics for sure.
And then just to finish off on, when you've got a new athlete with you and you're looking at their technique and their running mechanics, what things are you looking for? You're looking for a top down? Are you looking at bottom up? Or is there certain areas that you're looking for when you're analyzing their movement?
So in terms of top down or bottom, to me, that's, I guess, like in terms of like lifting, with certain lifts, I tend to do like a top down progression with some of the weights. So if we were doing like Olympic lifting, I would perform a small portion of the movement initially and then increase it. So it's a top down learning factor. In terms of analyzing running technique, yeah, there's just certain key elements that I'm on the lookout for. So I mentioned the dorsiflexion. So that's something I'm looking for, where the foot strikes, not too far in front of the body. So we want to be striking a little bit in front of the center of mass, but only a little bit. So we don't want to be overstriding, which would lead to an increase in braking forces rather than propulsive forces. And then an upright running posture with, again, a little bit of a forward lean's okay, but not too much. Efficient arm action, head carriage, some of the areas we're looking for. So with runners, we want a fairly efficient action. And what I do find is, as they get stronger in the weight room as well. So obviously we can cue certain key factors, and we can cue them in the drills we do as well. And I find it beneficial to hammer home those key points in the drills to allow that to hopefully translate across into the running action as a whole. But it often helps that when they get stronger in the gym, that helps them to achieve some of those key technical points as well.
And that's where you'll get their buy-in as well, in terms of them seeing the benefits of the effort they're putting in the gym, and then changes in their running technique and then performance on the track or wherever they're running, and seeing that transfer their training to performance.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I guess we've created a fourth factor. I said there's three key areas where this S&C benefits the running performance, with robustness, speed development, endurance development. But yeah, there's a fourth element as well, which ties into improved speed, of course. But yeah, it will help with technical improvements, because you need a certain amount of strength to achieve certain technical things. You need a certain amount of core strength to hold your body in a good manner. You need a certain amount of strength in the lower limbs in order to achieve short enough ground contact times that will allow for you to not strike too far in front of the center of mass. If your legs aren't strong enough, or they're not reactively strong enough, they're not able to produce enough force in a short enough period of time, by default, you then have to take a longer period of time in contact with the ground, which means you probably will overstride a little bit. You will reach out a little bit more to allow the body to have that longer ground contact time, which will result in increased braking forces. So if we can get stronger in the gym, that will allow a shorter ground contact time, which will allow us to strike ground more underneath our center of mass.
No, I think just to finish off on, it's been great to chat to you, Tim, around your experience in strength and conditioning and how that can tie in with running. And there's a lot of insights that people can take in different sports and within endurance work as well, in terms of running technique and how strength and conditioning can support endurance athletes. So have you got anything coming up in terms of Foxwood personal training, or any of your coaching in general? And then how can people get in touch with you if they have any more questions on anything in this area?
Yeah, so I do have a few things coming up. So I've got, my main brand is Foxwood Personal Training. So you can find me on the website, which is foxwoodpersonaltraining.co.uk. You can also find me on social media. My main one is Instagram. So if you search Foxwood Personal Training, that will come up. But I've got a bit of a spin-off page as well on Instagram, more specifically for the runners. So you can find that by typing in strength.training.for.runners, and then that will come up. And I have a few projects which I'm going to hopefully release soon-ish, which will be more pushed out on that page. So some sort of online, information products and stuff that you can buy to become more informed on strength training for runners. So that might be released within the next few months. I'll promote it on Foxwood Personal Training as well, but there's another page which is more specifically geared towards releasing that information. So those are probably the main two places you can find me. Happy to, for anyone to get in touch and chat things through.
And now I'll put those details in the show notes as well, if anyone wants to visit those websites or those Instagram pages and give them a follow as well. But thanks, Tim, very much for your time. Appreciate you sharing your insights and your knowledge around this area, and have a good rest of your day.
Yeah, and same to you. And thank you for having me on as well. It's been really enjoyable chatting.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Athletic Skills Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it helpful in learning more about impacting your youth athletes' movement and physical development. If you did enjoy this episode, please take a moment to give us a subscribe and share to any other coaches or teachers that you think it may help. Also, if you have any feedback or topics that you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us on social media or on the email in the description, and be more than happy to try and tackle those challenges you are facing as a sports coach or a PE teacher. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. I look forward to speaking to you soon.